Johnny, are you there? I guess you're out again today. Maybe you're busy, but are you doing okay? Well, it's Christmas soon. The year's almost over. Johnny, you haven't forgotten our pact, have you? That we'll meet again this year under the Christmas tree in D.C. on Christmas Eve? I don't care how late you show up. Just meet me there, okay? I'll be waiting. Anyway, call me again when you get in.
The N64 was a strange time for Nintendo. RPGs had become almost synonymous with their consoles, with the NES and the SNES being the home of countless classic cornerstones of the genre. Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Super Mario RPG, Wise, Saga, Uncharted Waters, Lufia, and even the freaking Ultima games got Since the NES took the market by storm, Nintendo had been a console brand of choice for RPGs, and then disc-based media happened. The N64 came out, and practically overnight, RPG and Nintendo went from this to this.
N64, the new adventure RPG for Nintendo 64.
It's awful! Disc-based media's ability to power gorgeous FMV cutscenes, store vast worlds filled with side quests, and barren wastelands with random encounters was much better suited to handle the aesthetic porn console RPGs were becoming defined by in the aftermath of Final Fantasy VII.
You think a cartridge was going to contain this power?
With less than 20 ever released, many of which not even getting outside of Japan, Hybrid Heaven had a lot of unjust expectations thrown upon it, priming the public to expect it to make up for the drought. Hybrid Heaven was, for some insane reason, marketed as an N64 response to the PlayStation exclusive Metal Gear Solid. Unfortunately, Hybrid Heaven was a lot more Metal Gear Rising than Solid, and this was about 14 years before we had the necessary melon cutting physics. To be fair, pretty much any game that attempted to have a cinematic, vaguely complex story was labeled the new Metal Gear Solid clone, as the game media of the time liked to do. Hybrid Heaven certainly does try to tell a much smarter tale than it actually does. Not only was the game marketed as having a story focus, but the director, Yasao Takai, even gave an interview to N64 magazine where he talked about the game's cinematic feel.
As you go through to the end, there are a lot of surprises, and many mysteries. And when you solve those mysteries, you'll create many more mysteries. It keeps you playing the game. And almost the second you boot the game up, you're greeted by an extremely impressive sky. And what to say? The narrative of Hybrid Heaven manages to check just about every box of bad storytelling. In spite of the detailed intro, most of the game is told through far more stilted in-engine cinematics that causes the plot beats to happen mostly through dialogue that is, for lack of a better word, disastrous.
I'm real disappointed in you. Are you trying to hurt our pride? Failure in us hybrids, the new human race, cannot be accepted.
Just about every major plot point is repeated ad nauseum, except also somehow manages to give us nothing to work with on a lot of the more interesting aspects that Metal Gear would. The story follows naked N64 man Johnny Slater, bodyguard to the president, going to meet up with Mr. Diaz to get supplies for an invasion, and due to meet up with his girlfriend under the Christmas tree in DC on Christmas Eve. Then there was a tiny small flash. Everything just changed. Johnny's brains got all rearranged. Now Mr. Diaz is the player character. Mr. Diaz fights off MIB mind wipers and escapes into a mysterious underground cloning facility. After some hijinks that's mostly just introducing future bosses, it turns out we are actually playing as Johnny Slater, but for real. And the Johnny that got shot was a clone meant to help replace the president with a loyal duplicate. Once Johnny discovers this, he also meets the people behind the switcheroo, the Gargantuans, a benevolent extraterrestrial people who captured Mr. Diaz and disguised Johnny as him. You see, the Gargantuans are neither invaders nor looters, but a single traitor took over their spaceship, and thus the underground shelter this here game takes place in. After getting his Diaz coding removed and meeting the President of the United States in the alien's custody, Johnny delves into the depths of the cloning facility looking for the Navigator, the heart of the ship. The plot is nothing to write home about. Despite the hype surrounding the narrative, it's a bare bones defeat the bad aliens plot, and it doesn't do much to deviate from that. Which is honestly a shame, because there's some promise on the bookends of the plot. Not only do both get a fancy, fully voiced cutscene, but the game also engages with some environmental storytelling. There's an early section before you bumble into releasing all the hybrid bioweapons. Wait, it's after? Then why the hell are they still in the cage? Where you actually get to see some of them in cages. It's basic, but seeing the monsters slam against the window with a jarring thud and screech gives these monsters an air of horror. Unfortunately, sights like this are rare, and the majority of the game's plot is a laboratory gray blur. Sure, some people end up being clones, Mr. Diaz becomes Johnny's liquid snake, and the President of the United States punches his own clone on national television. It's not as fun as it sounds. But the plot gives us next to nothing in terms of villain motivations, characterizations of anyone, deeper themes, or anything beyond what you'd find in almost any game of its time. It's just presented with more cinematic flair and top-notch graphics. And damn does Hybrid Heaven have some crispy visuals, especially in the character model department. People actually have discernible faces instead of agonized meat soup, and mouths that move when they speak. Something a lot of Dreamcast and even some PS2 and Xbox games didn't have. This is still early N64 we're talking about, so Johnny's hair still looks like he sprayed it solid and chipped a little bit off, but the modeling work in general is still leagues above a lot of its contemporaries. If you have an expansion pack installed, the game also enables 2 special high-res modes, full screen and letterbox. Now, you may have noticed that some of the game clips I've been using have had half the FPS of others, and in those same clips, you probably didn't notice that they had a higher resolution. I think that speaks volumes about this expansion pack functionality. What sense does it make to completely tank your game's playability for the sake of a modest resolution boost? It's not like the game is poorly optimized normally either. There's several large open areas that show up, and I was impressed by not only how little they affect the frame rate, but also that it didn't need to rely on a short draw distance to do so, like so many games from this time infamously did. The actual art direction that the graphics are powering is a lot more hit and miss. Some areas look more cool. The navigator room, this place, even some of the various labs you visit occasionally manage to capture that uncanny N64 vibe and be one of the smoothest examples in the polygonal transition era of gaming. But the game ends up taking place entirely within the underground complex, so more often than not, you're just looking at gray hallways and the bioweapons in them. The monster designs do a good job of giving the player an idea of what their weaknesses or resistances might be. A monster with big legs might have wider reaching kicks, a giant blob enemy might be immune to grabs, etc. They are impressively rendered, but none of them are going down as classics. Their designs are too noisy, and high quality graphics do not equal good visual design. The music fares a bit better. It's almost entirely short loops, the N64's limited storage capacity probably being the cause. I'm getting flashbacks to Thinking Police Truck by Dead Kennedy. But they fit in the background nicely and provide some sick beats to wander around to. The battle music, however, gets repetitive extremely fast due to there only being 2 tracks throughout most of it. One for normal fights, and another for bosses. Three of the 5 final bosses. I'll get back to that. Okay, so I actually don't get back to it. Kinda totally forgot. But yeah, there's 5 boss fights at the end, and this is the
mastermind.
And yes, that is out of the game's ass. Get their own unique themes, but for everyone else, it's one of those 2. I do also want to give credit to some of the atmospheric tense pieces, like what plays here when you get trapped. Want has a lot more emphasis here than I'd like, however, as you can't really maintain a scary atmosphere after the game blips fight on your screen, and the monster is looking to give you the old 1-2. But at the end of the day, Outer Hybrid Heaven is a game that lives and dies on its gameplay. And the gameplay is a high
Get it.
RPG, action, adventure, and fighting game elements. The action-adventure part takes the shape of a linear third-person shooter, puzzle solver, platformer, and while it may sound impressive to be able to list those off, Each of them is about as bare bones as you can get. For example, the shooting comes from a lame Wii Zapper that you can destroy robots and solve puzzles with. Not only does it lack any real punch, but it uses Resident Evil tank controls, and the lack of maneuverability, threat, or variety in shootable enemies makes the mechanic almost entirely useless. A lot of these dangers can also just be more easily avoided, but the game does at least reward interacting with it with item pickups, so it's not a complete waste of time. But it's also not really. The puzzle solving is just shooting stuff to make an obstacle go away, finding a keycard or passcode, or doing minor platforming puzzles like climbing up ledges and jumping. It doesn't amount to much more than things that technically qualify the game as having those genres in it. It reminds me of what you'd find in some fighting games, such as Mortal Kombat Deception with its Conquest mode, where the parts surrounding the attacking meat and blocking potatoes are there to just be a fun momentary diversion. Of course, for this kind of setup to work, the fighting has to actually be good enough to carry it. And luckily for Hybrid Heaven, its combat not only holds water, but is also a system I haven't seen anywhere else. The best way to describe it is as a somewhat traditional 3D fighting game, in the vein of something like Virtua Fighter. But whenever someone wants to attack you, they need to call it out, pause the game, and the opponent gets to choose a response. Attacking works like an active time battle system from the mid-foughts, but in real time.
Real-time,
Active time battle. Movement is done in real time and allows you a lot of freedom in how you make up or create space. How much you tilt the joystick affects how quickly you move, and holding the Z button allows free running. This level of control is important as, similar to more traditional fighters, footwork takes a huge role in finding success. Different moves have different ranges, some are harder to block than others, and reading which way the punches and kicks are coming from will help in knowing which direction to sidestep to best avoid them. Additionally, your damage output is modified by several other variables, such as what body part you are hitting, the skill level in the attack being done, and how much power is built up. What's a power bar, you say? Anytime you're not attacking or being attacked, the green bar at the top of your screen fills up. The more bar, the higher damage your attack will do. The refill rate is inversely related to how fast you are moving. It'll shoot up if you find the time to stand your ground, and it'll slow to a crawl if you're running around like a... This is easy to understand, and also helps incentivize a mixture of movement options, in order to keep the combat from drawing out. While it is technically possible to win by simply running in circles for long enough, it's a lot more fun, and a lot less time consuming to engage in the mid-range space jockeying. Multiple bars can be stored, with more storage being progressively awarded as you level up throughout the game, up to a max of 5. When you stop the game to choose attacks, you can link an attack per bar, and can make fully customizable combos. Items are used in the same way, with there being a variety of stat boosts, healing items, and even disposable guns. Despite Johnny having a gun in the platforming sections, he can't actually use it in battle. So instead, you collect different kinds of one-time use guns, each with its own element that has an effect, such as ice freezing the opponent, wind, which is seemingly unblockable, and fire, which I'm sure does something special. There is a form of attack that breaks through this formula. Grabs can be initiated at any time and have to connect fully in real time. Only afterwards does the action menu come up, and then, art. Yes, I revealed to you the definitive reason Hybrid Heaven is worth anyone's time. Despite Hybrid Heaven in general trying to keep a serious tone, out of nowhere, the fights turn the game into Monday Night Raw, with pile drivers, leg locks, RKOs out of nowhere. A lot of the animations look ripped straight from No Mercy, and every one is so satisfying to pull off. It's not just a choice in cinematics either. There are a few reasons to choose certain grabs over others given the situation and enemy type. Pulling one off gets you a knockdown, which allows you to go for ground attacks and holds, which lay no less smackdown. And the ground grabs you can do vary based on where you are and what side your opponent is laying down on. Despite its transparently clunky nature, I like the combat system a lot, but unless you either own or look up the manual, the only help you get is the start button prompts, which only tell you a single tip based on your current status. I was still learning core game mechanics by sheer dumb luck well after beating the game. This is especially an issue because many of the game's mechanics work behind the scenes. Speaking of which, I mentioned the game was an RPG earlier. Johnny has 6 base stats that level up in typical RPG fashion: HP, stamina, offense, defense, speed, and reflex, which I believe is what determines the success rate of grabs, reversals, and dodges. There's even a skill rating for every single attack in the game if you really want to get into the weeds. Hybrid Heaven uses the learn as you do model of progression, with Johnny being able to learn moves from enemies and upgrade each limb separately by using attacks with them. Every kind of attack you dish out makes some part of you more powerful. Getting hit makes you more resilient and teaches you the move you just got your ass kicked with. I should mention that I played through the game on normal, but the game wasn't exactly a cakewalk. Certain enemies can melt your life bar if you make a wrong move, especially enemies that focus on attacking your head. There's a limb crippling mechanic, which results in a debuff based on the part injured. Head renders you unconscious, arms and legs render their respective appendage unusable for attacks, and the torso makes your stamina recover slower. Oh yeah, and there's also a stamina meter. Look, I don't know what it does. I even looked up the manual online, but I never even noticed my stamina falling, let alone what effect it had on my fighting. Despite the fact that it took me until the literal final boss fight to discover how the combat fully works, I don't know if I want to call this an objective flaw. Yes, it makes the game far less accessible, but the campaign is well paced enough that I was able to keep playing while learning and still not feel handicapped. In fact, part of me was actually happy because it gave me a great excuse to start a hard playthrough. At about 18 hours, replaying the campaign isn't a gargantuan... task, and now that I understand the game's mechanics better, getting to fight stronger opponents is the kind of Goku shit I'm here for. Heaven manages to tap into the same desire to pick it apart that brings me into the training modes of fighting games. And wouldn't you know it, Hybrid Heaven has a versus mode. Now you won't find any 240p Justin Wong epic comeback videos of it on YouTube, but its attempts to bring 3D fighting games into the role-playing realm are a rare breed. The fact the game also has a 5-match arcade mode and 40-match survival mode is also a nice treat, as you gain experiences compatible with both the campaign and 2-player versus mode. And yes, to answer your question, you can load 2 different files to fight each other. Had this game caught on like it was 1999, I could have easily seen it being a great time bringing over your memory pack to a friend's place and pitting your custom warrior against theirs. Hybrid Heaven was never meant to be the N64's Metal Gear, but what Hybrid Heaven does deliver on is an RPG that went all in trying to create a new type of battle system. And that system is fun enough that despite the repetitive level design, lackluster adventure elements, and mostly stale story, I enjoyed my time with the game. If this was back when it came out, 1999, fresh off the presses for a shiny Ulysses S. Grant, I could definitely see the game's overall package being underwhelming. But you can find this game in the bargain shelf of almost any retro game store for under $15, and I don't see the insane popularity my video will bring it causing its value to spike.